This is the In Focus podcast from The Hindu.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the In Focus podcast. I'm your host G. Sampath. Kamala Harris's late entry in the presidential race leaves her with just 3 months to roll out her campaign. What kind of strategy will work best for Harris given her vulnerabilities, especially on the immigration issue and her record as Attorney General in California? As for the Republicans, their entire presidential campaign had been designed keeping in mind a race against President Biden. According to the Washington Post, Trump's running mate JD Vance reportedly told donors in a private meeting that the Biden to Harris switch was a political sucker punch. Now, what kind of adjustment will the Trump campaign need to make given that Harris doesn't carry the baggage, quote unquote, that Biden does? In this episode of In Focus, we take a closer look at how Team Trump and Team Harris are approaching the next 3 months of the presidential race, what issues they would seek to highlight, what strategies they will adopt in attacking their rivals, and how they define their own political vision. We are joined once again by Verghese K. George, the Hindu's resident editor in New Delhi, who recently traveled through the swing states on the campaign trail. Verghese, welcome back to In Focus.
Thank you, Sampath. Great to be back with you on In Focus once more.
Great. Verghese, the US presidential campaign typically runs for about 15 to 17 months. Kamala will get barely 3 months to get her campaign message across and secure those all-important 270 electoral votes. Wouldn't it be a big challenge to compress 15 months of work into just 3 months?
Well, I think, yes, it is a challenge, but I think that also is a great opportunity. In fact, it could possibly be a great advantage for Kamala Harris, according to some political analysis, which I tend to agree with, because a politician who's been around for decades in US politics would have invariably left a long trail of controversial positions, sometimes contradicting themselves in subsequent years from compared to their previous position, or balancing their positions depending on their audiences. Now, what happens in a long drawn presidential campaign is that your opponents get that opportunity to dig out stuff from your long past, and then they string all that together into a campaign against, because a negative campaigning is a significant portion of US electoral cycles. Against it is not only that the candidates actually talk about themselves. In fact, it is increasingly more about your opponent's weaknesses rather than one's own strengths. So Kamala Harris would have been a vulnerable candidate from many angles, including the two things that you mentioned. That is her track record as the vice president, who was supposedly in charge of immigration management, and her earlier positions during her political life about immigration in general, and her position on criminal justice system. All those things would, the more of that thing coming into public domain and public discourse at this point, would have sort of confused or fragmented the Democrats' base, because the Democrats, what base that they're looking at is a wide array of ideologically fragmented and sometimes very antagonistic groups that are being brought together on a common platform. So for Kamala Harris to have a shorter, compressed campaign period, I think would be a very good blessing in disguise. And I tend to go with that analysis that she will have an advantage. Somebody described, I don't remember who's an American commentator, who described she's more fit to be a sprint runner than a marathon one. So I think this is a sprint, exactly 100 days, and that might actually be to her advantage.
Right. Thank you for that, Verghese. It's a good way of understanding her approach as sprinter as opposed to a marathon runner. But some would argue, flip it around, the same thing what you said, the fact that she's had a relatively less amount of time in the campaign limelight Would you say? I mean, in this, as per this analysis, you're saying that it does leave her with less amount of baggage in terms of contradictory positions, statements which go against her current position, etc., etc. But that also, in another sense, leaves her some kind of a negative space. She's a blank slate in terms of a defined political personality. Everybody knows what Biden is. Everybody knows. By everybody, I mean the voters. They know what Trump stands for, but she seems to be this very vague person. We don't really know what kind of a person she is, what kind of a political a future or a vision. I mean, she doesn't have a track record of having clearly stood for something, fought certain battles. Do you think that will go against her? This negative space which that sort of surrounds her as an aura, which nobody really know what to make of her.
See, on the contrary, her appearance on the almost nearly abrupt entry as a presidential candidate actually helped galvanize the Democrat base. Why? Because as you rightly put it in JD Vance's words, this was a kind of a sucker punch for against the Republican campaign style and the strategy that they had developed, assuming that Joe Biden would be their contender. It is not because Kamala Harris is offering a significantly formidable political legacy or track record or charisma. In fact, she has, I mean, at the risk of uh, I mean, one would actually have to acknowledge or not the fact that she has none of it. If there were a Democratic primary, she would have faced a significant challenge from many Democrats,
Well,
and it
in
is
the
unlikely.
2019, in a 2019 campaign, Varghese, if you remember, I mean, she started off, in her presidential bid, she was leading. She was right at the front, and by the end of it, her ratings had come down to single digits. She lost all that capital which she began with. Precisely,
Right.
what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think by the time when she left the campaign in 2019, if I recall correctly, she had actually gone down to the sixth position after so many other contenders. Bernie Sanders was the leading contender at that point. She had slipped to the sixth position. In fact, she had never actually gone into a Democratic primary ballot anywhere. I think she dropped out even before the Iowa caucuses. If at all she did, I think after one or two initial states, she dropped out. So the point being that she does not have the political capital to carry the Democrats behind her in the event of an open contest. So that makes it this is one of the most curious candidacy in US political history. Here, what happens is that the Democrats were in a state of complete despair and dispirited space of a sense of mind they were in when Biden was collapsing as a political leader, as a president, and as a candidate. So they had no hope left in them. So suddenly there is a turnaround. The timing of that her announcement, Biden's exit and her entry, actually, and then suddenly all of the Democratic leadership immediately rallies behind her, precluding the possibility of an open convention and any other challenge to her candidacy. All that thing actually has galvanized the entire Democratic leadership to begin with, who control that process, and then the mass base of the Democratic Party, which always actually these days define themselves in terms of what they stand against, which is against what Trump stands for and stands what he is. And they suddenly find a rescue or a refuge in the candidacy of Kamala Harris. She ticks a lot of boxes, actually. She's a woman. Democrats can actually appeal to the women, and women have actually swayed U.S. election in the last two cycles, particularly after the Roe v. Wade Supreme Court decision, which actually removed abortion rights as a nationally applicable constitutional right. And she happens to be a black African American. She happens to be an Asian. She happens to be a progressive. She happens to be from California. There is a lot of things that are actually helps her as an ideal Democrat candidate, particularly when compared against what it may have been, which is a Biden versus Trump contest, which was which would have been disastrous for the Democrats. Or so in that sense, I would argue that this is the best case scenario if you are a Democratic elite leadership member of the leadership of the Democrats, which is actually delivered this as a kind of inevitable fate accompli to its voters, that if you want to escape Trump, here is a candidate who actually pretty much ticks a lot of boxes in our talking point, and it cannot get better than that.
Right. No, Verghese, I mean, I think the most important point you made in your response, which really struck me, is that on the one hand, you made it pretty clear that she would not have been able to carry enough of Democrats in an open contest. So she's got this endorsements and stuff coming her way. And at the same time, this person who would not have won an open contest has also managed to energize the entire Democratic base with the way the campaign was going. So, I mean, I find it a bit of a contradictory thing, but maybe it isn't. I don't know. But you also mentioned that she's black. Now, Trump has been saying that, she wasn't really black until, fairly recently. She had an Indian upbringing, she had an Indian identity. And if you look at the fundraising patterns, not many Indian communities have been sort of tripping over each other to raise funds for Harris. The way they did, for instance, I mean, I don't know, you can correct me if I'm wrong, for Tulsi Gabbard, for instance. So, how black is she really? If that question were to come up, how do you think it's going to play out?
Well, I think just a couple of general points before I get to what might Trump be thinking when he said that. So, first of all, if you, from whatever history that we publicly available about Kamala Harris' life than by her biography, her attempt has been very clearly to place herself as an African American rather than an Indian American. In fact, that is the reason why there is very limited enthusiasm among Indian Americans, or at least there is muted enthusiasm, let me put it that way, among Indian Americans about her candidacy. She's not been particularly active among the Indian American community. If anything, she has actually tried to keep a safe distance from the Indian American politics in the United States. For two reasons, I would assume. One is that she wanted to emphasize the African American part of her, the African origins of her lineage, that part she wanted to emphasize. She also perhaps wanted to keep a safe distance from a lot of ethnic politics that Indian Americans themselves subscribe to, which might actually come into collision with the Democrats' progressive pitch on
Like,
many
what
social
kind of
and
ethnic politics you're talking about here, Verghese?
well, I think she, though I don't think whether she's expressed very explicit antagonism to the strands of Hindutva politics that is visible among Indian Americans. Some of the Democrats, like for example, Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy and all, they've been struggling to find a very fine balance between attending overseas Friends of BJP event at one hand, and then trying to maintain the politics of inclusion and cultural diversity that the Democrats claim to propagate. So it's a too complicated a balancing act for a Democratic politicians to do. So Kamala Harris did not perhaps want to get involved into it, but that is a subsidiary factor. I would say the main factor is that she knew that okay, her politics will have to be dependent on the African American legacy and that environment. From all what we know, her upbringing was around African American neighborhoods and that intellectual ecosystem. Her political mentors have been African American politicians. So all that thing actually makes her more an African American politician than an Indian American politician. But now we come to why Trump might have said what he said, which is actually, I will say that if you want to say evil genius, but the Trump's genius in terms of attacking the identity politics and drive wedges in the contradictions within these multiple identity groups that form the Democrat base in the United States. So here what is happening is Indian Americans have they may not say it, articulate in the way I am going to do right now, have a kind of antipathy towards affirmative action targeting African Americans. Why? For example, if you look at the diversity debates in the United States, admissions at Harvard, or you take this very heated debate on admissions at this premier high school, Thomas Jefferson High School in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. So the diversity programs promoted by the Democrats primarily aim the overrepresentation, so to speak, of Asians. Asians mean Chinese and Indian American kids actually practically sweep up all the seats in this high school, Thomas Jefferson High School. So when you argue for diversity premised or based admission policies, the people who think that are being treated unfairly, paradoxically, ironically as it is, are the Chinese origin or Asian origin, Filipinos and Korean origin and Indian origin parents. They come out in protest against diversity policies because they think it is in a meritorious society that they are thriving. And this diversity debate is actually stunting their prospects in a merit-driven society. So while Trump, by bringing that up and putting the spotlight on Asian American or Asian Indian American, sorry, Asian Indian American or Asian African American, Trump is trying to actually drive this wedge between the social groups that are purportedly broadly in support of the Democrats.
Right, that's really very fascinating to hear about this entire identity-based politics within identity politics, so to speak. But Democrats have traditionally, at least from I think the early mid 1990s, have been able to win primarily. When to a large extent, it would not have been possible for them to win without 80% plus support from the blacks. Isn't that right? I mean, and that's probably what Harris's team would be banking on.
Right. I mean, that is exactly the point that Trump is trying to get at. I do not know the 80% figure offhand. If I'm sure you must be citing it from your own sources. But take two significant states that actually could be very, very critical in this election: Michigan and Georgia. So in certain black counties, certain black areas will actually swing the entire state, and one swinging that one of those states or two of those states can actually have a clear-cut impact on the outcome of the election, including who wins. So Trump is trying very clearly to first he's saying that he's trying to push back against the campaign that he is against African Americans. He's been actually holding forth on that point for a long time. With limited success, there is a lot of resistance from African American intellectuals. Some people actually contest his claim, but he is on that point that, okay, when I am talking against illegal immigration, the people who are going to be protected the most are the African Americans because they are the victim of this the people the displacement of jobs due to low paid undocumented entrance into the job market that is highly disproportionately detrimental to the African Americans. So he's playing that card at one level, and then he is also telling them that, okay, here is a candidate who is pretending to be one of you, but her policies of she's actually been an Indian American who is not really in favor of all that inclusion that they claim to represent. And of all things, he also appeals to the Indian Americans. He says that I am for merit, He's saying I am only against illegal immigration. In fact, he's in one of his podcasts in the last month or so, he said that if he becomes president, any student who gets a US degree, his degree will come with an automatic green card. The point being that he is welcoming immigrants who are coming in legally. And he's actually making this point that there should be easier pathways to legal immigration and much tougher crackdown against undocumented entry into the United States. So he's trying to, because as you rightly said, democratic identity politics is a conglomeration of numerous mutinous identity politics within that tent. Trump's strategy, part of his strategy is to instigate tensions between individual collective identities within this identity, the larger inclusive democratic propaganda that the Kamala Harris wants to thrive on.
Right. Now, I mean, it's pretty difficult for one to imagine Harris sort of playing the entire campaign on the immigration wicket, so to speak, and emerge on top there. So, do you think abortion rights is going to be the central theme of her campaign? She's going to center stage abortion rights, especially in the aftermath of Roe versus Wade being overturned, and also push Trump on this entire misogyny theme around it. I mean, do they really? Does the Trump team have a clear, cogent response or a framework to talk about women's rights at all, or are they going to be on the back foot here, helping the Democrats?
Taking a step back, so Kamala Harris's strategy appears to be two-pronged at the moment. One is she wants to be seen as the candidate of the future. That essentially means that she wants to shed the legacy of her association with Joe Biden and other things. And she's 2 decades younger than, nearly 2 decades, I guess, younger than Trump. And therefore, she wants to be seen as a candidate of the future. That is one part of the thing. A second is women, and more particularly within that spectrum, the question of abortion is a trouble spot for Trump's candidacy, more so after he has recruited JD Vance as his running mate. Now, this gender debate with the abortion as its central point again, Democrats think, and Kamala Harris more so, that that can be the defining point, and that should be the defining point, which can actually excite half the population, including a portion of the Republican women, because denial of right to access to abortion affects a lot of women. But it is not limited to that thing. Abortion is just one part of it. But there is also this allegation of promoting a misogynistic agenda or comments that Trump may have done in the past, and a general Republican lack of appreciation, so to speak, of women's rights, which is actually, I would say, part of it is because their emphasis on family and family values, etc., takes a quick turn, acquiring a kind of hostility towards women, or at least in the representation of that position by the Democrats. So what is happening at the moment is, on this question, both Trump and Kamala Harris are depending on a large misrepresentation of the opponent's position to emphasize their distinction from the opponent. For instance, Trump in a recent speech said Kamala Harris is for killing babies even after they are delivered.
She wants abortions in the 8th and 9th month of pregnancy. That's fine with her, right up until birth, and even after birth, the execution of a baby, because that's not abortion, that's the execution of a baby.
It's a very gross misrepresentation of her position on abortion. Kamala Harris, on her part, accuses Trump of conspiring to have a nationwide ban on abortion.
We who will fight for reproductive freedom, knowing if Trump gets the chance, he will sign a national abortion ban to outlaw abortion in every single state, but we are not going to let that happen.
Which is also a gross misrepresentation of Trump's position on abortion. But both sides think
But
that
isn't that Vance's position, a nationwide ban on abortion? Isn't that JD Vance's position?
No, this is JD Vance's position on nationwide. Even if at all he holds on to that position, which that is one of those steps that of his earlier this thing, which we discussed earlier in the earlier in this segment. You will have all the people who may have said all the things, different things on any political point in the last 20 years. That is what US politics, this thing is. So what we'll have to go by is what Trump is saying. He's leading the ticket, number one. And JD Vance is hence said that whatever Trump says is his position. And it is not even that JD Vance has to say it, but the leading, who is leading the ticket will say what the position is. So Trump's own position, Trump was a complete pro-choice at one point in his life and career when he was a Democrat briefly, right? So there is no point we trying to litigate this issue based on what somebody may have said years ago. We'll have to go by what it is right now. So, but anyway, so a sharpening or a polarization of electorate based on that thing is what Kamala Harris wants. Whereas what Trump wants is a polarization based on a singular question on immigration. So I would say what we see right now is a contest to frame the election. So any political campaign, I would say, the framing of that campaign is the most determining factor of the entire election. So in this election, the contest at the moment is to frame the election itself. Uh, in Kamala Harris's scheme of things, framing the election as a referendum on women and particularly the abortion question, she thinks she will win that contest, a referendum. Whereas Trump believes that framing this election as a referendum on immigration will give him the better chance. It is not that both of them are leaving the other side. I mean, Kamala Harris also addressing the immigration part by appearing to be more tough than she is actually been, because she knows that it is a vulnerable point. So she is claiming in her recent ads that, oh, no, I have also been tough on immigration. It is not only Trump. I also am tough dealing with the immigrants. Trump is trying to moderate or appearing to moderate his position on abortion question than he actually is has been, or rather, in the recent past, particularly during his presidency, when he appointed judges to the Supreme Court who were actually critical in the overturning of the Roe v. Wade. Now, the final point on this question, Sambat, I would want to point out is Trump is also he's applying the gender debate also to create a drive wedge within the Democrat camp. For instance, something similar to the pitching Indian Americans versus African Americans, he's actually trying to pitch the classical feminist approach within the US political spectrum against this transgender politics that is very closely associated with the democratic politics. For example, he's repeatedly said that I will not let women or people who have transitioned to women in women's sport. He repeatedly makes his point in his rallies. Only women will contest women's sport. And then he has examples about how a 6-footer came and knocked off a 5-foot woman who's actually practiced boxing all her life. And suddenly this man who was a boxer, who's declared himself as, I don't even know whether this is an actual incident or not, but I've heard him speak this kind of things in his rallies in the recent past. So he's actually trying to pitch classical feminist critique of US society against the transgender politics, telling them that, okay, the Democrats are not your platform to protect the rights of women, but we are, the Republicans are.
Right. I mean, especially with the boxing controversy in the Olympics, I mean, it does, I think it's likely to have some resonance. One can't deny that. You've sort of explained so well, Verghese, how there's going to be competing narratives, one which center stages immigration, other which center stages women's rights and abortion rights specifically. No, I don't know. So whichever narrative takes over the campaign, I don't know, does it depend on who's willing to spend more money, who creates the more viral memes? Because a lot of the US presidential campaign points are coming out in terms of entertaining AI videos and memes. They seem to be playing a big role. Now, amidst all this, one question which sort of I wanted to ask you, the Biden administration, the last 2-3 years, one hears that the economy has been doing well, but the working classes haven't been doing so well. So are those bread and butter issues going to figure at all? Because Trump has come out all guns blazing by calling Kamala Harris a communist, a radical, a dangerous leftist, and so on. So by painting her as a leftist, is he in a way trying to occupy the centrist space, notwithstanding the right-wing rhetoric it goes with? So I just wondered your thoughts on how this is going to affect the campaign, especially in the swing states, the economic dimension, and this whole rhetoric of Harris being a leftist.
Well, I mean, in fact, though from so what you described, a scenario which actually appears to the general common voter, extremely antagonistic position on these issues, economic issues. But what actually we get to see is if you scratch the surface, both, that is the rather curious consensus in the United States politics. Neither party actually goes deep into the structural issues that are causing this economic distress to the lower strata and the middle strata of the US economy. There is a large consensus implicit uh, of not questioning the structural reasons why American workers and American middle class and the lower strata are in the state of dire. Um, I mean, I don't know whether we can call it penury, but of course, a state of distress. What they do invariably is actually they divert these issues into cultural questions. While cultural questions are easy to mobilize and people get very passionate about what those questions are, that are also in a way numbs reasonable and complicated debates and discussions on the US economy policy and how US companies actually continues to drive, dominate, and in fact manage to accumulate large majority of the wealth that is created within that society. So that is one reason. I mean, when we discussed how the Democrats managed to to avoid an internal contest and chaos within the party, the debate that they avoided is this one, which is about the structural issues that plague US economy and Democratic Party's own linkages with that thing. They have made it into a question of African Americans and women and women's rights, etc. They are all very valid debates. But the fundamental reason why all these debates, America has become such a contentious, fractious society, I would say, are the economic distress that is ruining a significant part of its population. Now, what the Democrats by do is also, or maybe let sort of flip that thing. What the Republicans do is that the Republicans actually appeal to the working class. To be fair to Trump, Trump at least addresses that question about, okay, how American manufacturing has vanished, how American companies have looted, or companies have been less than fair to its workers, so on and so forth. How the what is called globalization came at the expense of the workers, not at the expense of American stock market investors or its CEOs. Trump at least addresses this question to a great extent. He started that question. And in fact, to be fair again, last Biden administration, I would say because of the Trump populism and how they were forced to do it, I was recently seeing a post by Bernie Sanders who said one of those asthma inhalers used to cost some $650 in the US. Can you believe it? Now, there after a law like Biden administration made, it is now selling at some $30 or $40. It's 1/10 or 1/20th of the price that it used to be sold. This used to happen because there was the so-called consensus in the US that American companies are free to make as much money as they want, and that is how it used to run. So there is some forced rethinking on this. This I am talking about the structural aspects of US economy. Some of that is happening, I would say, primarily because of the threat brought in by the populism instigated by Donald Trump and his politics. And personally speaking, I don't think Trump himself understands the complexities involved in this thing. But he understands one thing, which is that he, being a marketer, he knows that, okay, if I say this thing, this is how the working class will respond. So he is merely marketing a politics which he thinks will get him more people behind him. But that has actually had the unintended consequence of a rethinking within the Democrats about what should be a fairer way of reorganizing US economy and its links with US politics. So we can only hope, because what US does in this realm will have implications across the world, including India. The link between the market and the society, and the link between market and the politics of the country, and particularly electoral politics. So if there is a new equilibrium that can be reached in through this electoral process, it will be good. But at the moment, I don't see any adequate attention to that part of it, because both parties think that keeping the cultural questions in the front burner is more beneficial to each of them, and they're actually following that track at the moment.
Right. Thank you so much, Varghese. I think very beautifully explained how we have sort of joined the dots between the political competition induced by Trump's populism and how it has sort of, though unintended, sort of led to a series of consequences which may have had some marginal differences, a positive impact on the working classes, like the inhaler example you gave. But nonetheless, both the parties are more comfortable fighting on cultural issues, which are valid nonetheless, but they are not at the base of the whole competition here, the base of the whole, what should I say, the determining factors of quality of life, the whole cost of living crisis everybody is talking about. So we sort of come back to this entire question of competing narratives which are linked to your spending power, your memeing power. I think they are going to play a big part in the months to come. We have run out of time, unfortunately. Thank you so much, Varghese. Any last words you want to add in on some of the points we have touched upon before we wrap up?
No, I think, as I said, we'll have to wait and see this competition to frame the competition. So that is what it is happening right now. So I think whoever will win the contest for the framing of the competition, I think will have a significant edge over the opponent. That is what I would. That is a thought that I would want to leave with.
Great. I mean, competition to frame the terms of the competition. Thank you so much, Varghese. Absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Sambat. Great pleasure talking to
you. In Focus will be back soon with analysis of the biggest news issues. In the meantime, you can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and other platforms. Just search for In Focus by The Hindu. We'll see you soon.